On January 16, 1943, in Portland Harbor, Oregon, the morning was calm and cold, with the water acting as a perfect mirror beneath a pale gray sky. Dock workers moved slowly through the fog, preparing another Liberty ship for inspection. The SS Skenctity had been launched only weeks earlier, a gleaming symbol of American industrial might from the Kaiser shipyards. She was a product of an industrial miracle, built faster than ever before, welded instead of riveted, and assembled like a car rolling off a line. But as the sun rose, that miracle turned into a nightmare. At 11:15 a.m., a sharp metallic crack echoed across the docks, sounding first like a gunshot, then a chorus of tearing steel. Within seconds, the ship's massive hull began to bend. Witnesses said the deck plates rippled as if alive, then split open with a deafening roar. A fracture raced from bow to stern in a single moment, slicing through the ship like an invisible knife. When the noise stopped, the Skenctity was no longer a ship, but two halves of twisted steel. There had been no storm, no explosion, and no torpedo, yet the ship had simply cracked in half while tied to the pier. Investigators arrived within hours, finding fractures that were smooth and surgical, as if the steel had shattered rather than torn. Theories included bad welds, cheap steel, or sabotage, but none explained why this ship failed so violently and why it was not the first. In previous months, Liberty ships around the world had begun splitting apart without warning. The SS John P. Gaines snapped in half in calm Alaskan seas, and the SS Manhattan fractured so suddenly its crew abandoned ship in a panic. Between 1943 and 1944, more than 2,500 ships reported serious structural failures, with 19 breaking completely in two. These were not enemy kills, they were ships committing suicide. Every single one had been built the same way, welded fast and mass-produced. After Pearl Harbor, the United States needed cargo ships by the hundreds to carry weapons and fuel across two oceans. Traditional shipbuilding took 8 months per vessel, which was too slow for total war. Industrialist Henry Kaiser, who had never built a ship before, promised a revolution: cargo ships built in weeks instead of months. By late 1942, his yards were launching Liberty ships every 42 days. But speed had a cost. In the frozen waters of the North Atlantic, where temperatures plunged below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, Liberty ships began to fail in strange ways. The welded hulls were behaving differently than the old riveted ones. Small cracks that should have stopped at a seam were instead racing unchecked across entire hulls, devouring steel in seconds. The very process that made the ships fast to build was making them fatally brittle. Sailors began to fear the vessels, with some refusing to sleep below deck for fear of being trapped. Others spoke of eerie pings echoing through the steel, like glass under strain, just hours before disaster. By the end of 1943, the program was a national embarrassment. Each fracture was a blow to the war effort, yet no one could explain it. Congressional committees demanded answers, while naval architects, welders, and steel mills blamed one another. The miracle was cracking under its own success. In a shipyard in California, under flickering lamps, a woman named Bessie Hamill was about to see what the experts had missed. Kaiser had delivered on his promise of speed, using giant prefabrication sheds and 24-hour shifts. Ships were rolling off the line in 40 days or less, with one, the SS WWII, completed in just over 4 days. But the Liberty ship was an engineering compromise designed for speed, not longevity. Welding was faster than riveting and saved weight, but it introduced stresses no one understood. Riveted joints acted as natural crack stoppers, but welded seams created continuous sheets of metal from bow to stern. This continuity was strong under compression, but terrifyingly fragile under tension. In California's mild climate, the problem was invisible, but in the cold Atlantic, the steel lost its ductility. A microscopic flaw could become the starting point of a catastrophe. Kaiser shipyards used teams of welders, many of them women new to industrial work. They worked 16-hour shifts under slogans like "Speed wins wars," but speed led to mistakes. There was no standard welding sequence, and crews often welded long seams from one end to the other in a single pass. As the metal cooled, it contracted unevenly, locking residual stress deep into the structure. By the time a ship was finished, its hull carried millions of pounds of tension, coiled like a spring, waiting to snap. When the cracks began as thin hairlines near deck hatches, engineers dismissed them, but the failures came without warning, with crews describing the ships as tearing apart from within. Investigators blamed unskilled labor or bad materials, but metallurgists found the steel and welds passed every inspection. The numbers said the ships were strong, yet they were failing. Bessie Hamill, working the graveyard shift at Richmond Shipyard No. 3, noticed something the engineers did not. Night after night, she watched the metal move, the seams warp, and the plates twist under her torch. She could feel it in her hands. The ships were being built wrong. To Bessie, the shipyard was alive, and she had been there long enough to know the sound of a good weld versus a stressed joint, which rang higher like a violin string pulled too tight. She noticed that massive steel plates warped in strange patterns, bowing inward as they cooled. While other welders used brute force to hammer plates into place, Bessie watched and marked how the steel moved. She kept a notebook in her lunch pail, sketching diagrams of the twisting metal and the sequence of heat zones. She saw a pattern. Every shift followed the same sequence, welding from edges towards the center or running continuous straight seams. Each cooling weld pulled the metal tighter, locking in tension. When she tried to tell her foreman, he laughed and told her to mind her quota. But Bessie realized the process was blind. Blueprints dictated where to weld, but not when or how. Designers worked from numbers, while she worked from heat and instinct. One night she stayed behind and welded scrap pieces in different sequences. Plates welded from the edges inward bent like warped wood, but plates welded from the center outward stayed flat. Her foreman again dismissed her as just a welder, but Bessie spent her weekends running more experiments. She realized the engineers had created a system that guaranteed internal tension in every ship. In November 1943, she requested an official meeting to challenge the engineering department's procedures, a move that could have gotten her fired. She wrote a single line on the form: stress from improper welding sequence causing hull failure. The supervisors expected a complaint, but got a demonstration. Bessie showed how heat moved through steel and how starting in the center and alternating sides released stress outward. Though most dismissed her, an older supervisor named Charles Horton stayed behind. He watched her work and saw the plate remain flat. He ordered a controlled test in a corner of the yard. Bessie's team welded two identical panels, one using the standard edge-first method and one using her center-out sequence. The first plate twisted, but the second stayed flat. When metallurgists installed strain gauges, the results stunned them. Traditional sequences left 30,000 pounds of stress per square inch, while Bessie's sequence reduced it to 12,000. The difference was measurable and undeniable. Henry Kaiser requested a full briefing, and when formal pressure tests were applied, the standard welds cracked along the same lines as the failed ships at sea, while Bessie's welds held. Kaiser faced a radical decision. Stopping the line would halt mass production and slow the delivery of ships the Navy desperately needed. But the data showed the failures were systematic and built into the process. Kaiser gave the order to stop the line and retrain every worker. Overnight, the shipyards became classrooms. Each welder received new diagrams based on Bessie's balanced welding sequence, moving from the center outward in short bursts. Production dropped by 30% initially, and critics called it industrial suicide, but the results in the test bays kept coming. Engineers began to understand the physics. In cold seas, the steel's crystal lattice lost flexibility, making it brittle. A tiny crack could travel the entire hull at the speed of sound. The solution was to let the steel breathe by welding from the center outward. This didn't require new materials, just a new rhythm. By December 1943, the first hull section built this way held perfectly under simulated Atlantic storm loads. Kaiser then ordered the redesign of the next generation of ships, the Victory class. These ships featured rounded hatch corners to eliminate stress concentrations and used modular construction for precise welding control. The steel alloy was also refined, adding manganese and nickel to maintain toughness in freezing water. By February 1944, the Richmond shipyards followed a musical sequence of steps and pauses. Kaiser's gamble paid off as errors vanished and weld rejection rates plummeted. The first Victory-class hull, nicknamed the Straight Ship, showed 0 microcracks under scans. In March 1944, the modular system was fully implemented. Sections were built separately, then joined in a synchronized operation. On May 12, 1944, 17 prefabricated modules were lowered into position and welded using Bessie's sequence. The operation lasted only 11 hours, and every measurement fit perfectly. At 5:11 a.m. on June 27th, the SS Benjamin Warner slid into the water. It had taken only 5 days and 11 hours from keel laying to sea trials, a record of perfection through precision. The Victory fleet became the backbone of Allied logistics, and not one of them ever broke in half. The design was so sound that many sailed for decades after the war. The 5-day miracle proved that quality and speed were partners when built on process. For Bessie Hamill, the Victory was quiet. Her name did not appear in the official reports, but the men who once laughed now called her Boss Bess. The mystery of the breaking ships was solved by understanding that strength comes from flexibility. Victory steel, with its killed steel process and lower transition temperature, could survive the freezing North Atlantic, where Liberty steel shattered like porcelain. Rounded hatches reduced stress multipliers by half, and deliberate crack arresters, strategic riveted joints, prevented fractures from spreading. Between June 1944 and the war's end, 531 Victory ships entered service with 0 catastrophic hull failures. Sailors who once slept in fear now had confidence in their vessels. After the war, Bessie clocked out for the last time in 1946 and returned to a quiet life. In 1947, the American Welding Association codified the balanced welding sequence into the Structural Welding Code, which remains the global standard today. Her influence is found in the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the seismic retrofitting of the Golden Gate Bridge, and the construction of nuclear reactors. Bessie Hamill lived quietly in Sacramento until her death in 1987, her 3-sentence obituary never mentioning that she changed the way the world builds its ships. Her legacy is not in a monument, but in every skyscraper, bridge, and ship that stands because someone cared enough to ask why.